We continue now at the top of Daf Lamed Gimel Lamed Aleph in Mesechet Sanhedrin. This is Sanhedrin Daf 33a. On the previous summit, the Gemara was discussing the halacha that when it comes to dinei nefashos, we are poschen, we begin deliberations. Tchila lezachus. First, we talk about zachus. We talk about innocence. And Abaye and Rava, they say on the previous summit that what does that mean? It means that we say if you didn't kill anyone, then you have nothing to be afraid of. There are other Amoraim that give other opinions what it means. And the Gemara in the previous summit said we have a brisa that supports Abaye and Rava. The brisa quotes Rebbe, and Rebbe brings what we say by sota, and he says mikan sheposchen bedinei nefashos tchila lezachus. Just like by sota, we first say that if you did nothing wrong, then nothing will happen. So too, mikan, from here we learn that by all dinei nefashos we are poschen tchila lezachus. We open the deliberations lezachus. And Rashi explains mikan sheposchen umidiyolef psichas hazachus mehacha. From the fact that we learn out psichas hazachus from here, we learn it out from sota. So therefore, hainu lo katat lo sitcho. That's the same thing as saying that if you didn't kill anyone, then you shouldn't be afraid. That's essentially what we tell the sota, ki Abaye v'Rava. That's like Abaye and Rava. And the Gemara continues at the two dots, Dinei Mamonis Machzir and V'chulu. It said when it comes to monetary cases, so those will overturn the verdict. We will retry the case, whether it's a situation where we have to retry the case for innocence or for guilt. And the Gemara says, Uraminu, we have the following contradiction, and this is from a Mishnah in Bechoros. The Mishnah says, Don es hadin ziko es hachayev chayev es hazakai. Let's say the case was tried, and they say the guilty party was innocent. They say that the innocent party was guilty, or time esatar, tier esatamar, or esatame, or they say that something pure was impure, or the reverse, they say something impure was pure. In other words, the ruling was mistaken. So the halacha is masha asa asoi v'yashali mi beisa. Whatever the ruling was, that ruling stays, and he has to pay, meaning the judge has to pay from his own household. He has to pay, he has to compensate for the mistake. And Rashi explains, Masha Asa, Asai Alma Lohadr. You see, not like the Mishnah, you see that we're not machzir, and we don't overturn the verdict and retry the case. On the contrary, the Mishnah says in Bechoros, Masha Asa, Asai, that whatever was done, was done. And the Gemara continues and answers, Amar Rav Yosef says, Lokash, it's not difficult. Kan b'mumchen, in one case we're talking about an expert judge, Kan b'she'eno mumchen. In the other case, we're talking about a judge who is not an expert. And Rashi explains, b'mumcha yesh bo koach lachzer. When you're talking about a mumcha, so then we can retry the case. And the baldin, the litigant, can't say that I'm going to go like your first reasoning. But Rashi continues, but when the judge is not an expert, so then already the litigant can say to him, or who says that your later reasoning is going to be correct? Or maybe what you said at first is correct. Maybe you're making a mistake in retrying the case. And so therefore, when you have someone that's not an expert, we are not going to retry the case. That's the Mishnah in Bechoros, Masha Asa Asoi. And our Mishnah, which says that we do retry the case, that's talking about a mumcha. But the Gemara continues, Uva mumcha machzirin, but is it really true that by an expert judge we would retry the case? V'akatani, but didn't we learn in that same Mishnah in Bechoros, Im haya mumcha lebezin, that if he was an expert, pater milashalim, that he does not need to pay, he's exempt, meaning the judge is exempt from paying. And Rashi explains, pater milashalim, he's exempt, alma masha asa asa. You see that if he's exempt from paying, so then you see that by the mumcha, on the contrary, the ruling actually stands. Umiu pater milashalim, now he doesn't have to pay, dekevan de mumchu, because since he's an expert, mazla bisha dahu gavra, garam le'lamite, so it was just the bad fortune of this particular litigant that caused that he made a mistake. But it sounds like from the Mishnah in Bechoros that on the contrary, even when it comes to a mumcha, or rather that the Mishnah in Bechoros is talking specifically about a mumcha, and in that situation we do not retry the case. And the Gemara continues and answers, Amar of Nachman. Of Nachman says, the answer to the question actually is as follows, Kan sheyesh gadol heimenu b'chachma u'v'minyan, kan shein gadol heimenu b'chachma u'v'minyan. In one case we're talking where there's somebody greater, there's some greater court in wisdom and in numbers, and in the other case we're talking where there is no greater court in wisdom and in numbers. And Rashi explains, yesh gadol heimenu, if there's a court that's greater, then also gadol machzir devarav shel zed yesh b'koach levatel. That's what our Mishnah is saying, that you retry the case because that greater court can retry the case. But ein gadol mimenu, but if there's no one greater, so then lotzayis le baldin la durei uvda, so then already the litigant's not going to listen to the new ruling. Ve'afilu zeh omer ta'isi lav kol kamine. And even if this first judge says I made a mistake, he doesn't have that power to say that he made a mistake. And so essentially Rav Nachman is answering the contradiction between our Mishnah and the Mishnah in Bechoros, that the question is if there's a greater court that you can go to, if you can turn to a greater court, that's our Mishnah, then we retry the case. case. But if you cannot turn to a greater court, then we do not retry the case. And the Gemara continues with another answer. Rav Shesha says, Kan Shata B'dvar Mishnah. In one case, we're talking where the mistake was in a simple Mishnah, and Kan Shata B'shikol Hadas. In the other case, we're talking where the mistake was made in terms of consideration of the matter. And Rashi explains, Tova B'dvar Mishnah Shata'usa Matzui B'dvar HaMishnah. In other words, you can find the mistake right there in the Mishnah. Ein dino din lagamri v'chozer. In that case, the ruling is nothing, and we retry the case. That's our Mishnah. And Shikol Hadas, Rashi says, Lakamon Meforish. The Gemara is going to explain later on what it means, Shikol Hadas. And the Gemara continues, the Amar Rav Shesha Amar Rav Asi, because Rav Shesha says that Rav Asi says, Ta bidvar Mishnah choser. If a person makes a mistake in terms of a simple Mishnah, so then you have to retry the case. Ta b'shikol hadas eino choser. But if there's a mistake in Shikol Hadas, so then you don't retry the case. And the Gemara continues, Amar le Ravina le Ravashi. Ravina said to Ravashi, and the Bach says that some have the girsa of Rav Hamnuna said to Rav Sheshes, Afilu ta b'Rabi Chia v'Rabi Oshia. Even let's say the judge made a mistake, not in a Mishnah, but in some teaching of Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Oshia, would that also be like ta b'dvar Mishnah? Amar le'in, he said yes. Afilu b'Rav Shmuel. What if he made a mistake in statements of Rav and Shmuel? Amar le'in, he said yes, that's the same thing. Afilu b'didi v'didach, even if it's a mistake in something that I said or that you said. Amar le said to him, Atu anon katale kani bi'agman. Do you think that we cut reeds in the swamp? We are also great scholars, and it would be the same thing. And the Gemara continues, Hechi dami shikol hadas. What exactly does it mean, a mistake in shikol hadas? Amar Papa says, could go in trei tanoi or trei amoroi. Let's say you have two tanoim and two amoroim, the pligia hadadia, that they argue with one another. V'lo itmer hilchas lo kamar v'lo kamar, and it was never stated the halachas like this one or the halachas like that one. V'ikri v'yavad kechad minayu, and then he goes ahead and does like one of them. V'sugya d'shmaita azli kidach, but it happens to be that the conclusion of the sugya follows the other one. Hainu shikol hadas. That's considered to be a mistake in shikol hadas. And the Gemara continues, Eisvei Rav Hamnuna Rav Sheshes. Rav Hamnuna asked Rav Sheshes the following question, and this is also from the Mishnah in Bechoros. Ma'isa beParashal Beis Menachem Shenitel Ha'im Shalah. There was an incident with a cow in Beis Menachem, and the aim shalah, which means the womb, was taken out. And the question is whether that's considered a treifa or not. Ve'achila Rabbi Tarfon leklavim, and Rabbi Tarfon, he caused it to be fed to the dogs because he ruled that that's considered to be a treifa if it has no womb. Uva ma'isel ifnei chachamim, and this incident came before the chachamim b'Yavne and Yavne v'hitiru, and they actually said that it's permissible, it's not considered a treifa. An animal like that can survive. Sha'amar Tudas Harofe, because Tudas Harofe said, Ein para v'chazera yotzes ma'Alexandria shal Mitzrayim, that there was no cow and there was no pig that came out of Alexandria of Egypt. Elim kein chotchen ha'em shalah, they always would cut out the womb. Kedei shalotela, they always wanted to prevent it from giving birth. And so therefore this ruling was actually in error. It was a perfectly kosher animal. And the Mishnah continues, Amar Rabbi Tarfon says, Holcha chamorcha tarfon, you've lost your donkey because you have to compensate. You issued a ruling that was incorrect. Amar lo Rabbi Akiva said to him, Patarata, you're actually exempt from paying, Shekol ha'mumcha l'ravim pater milashalim, because anyone who's an expert judge for the public is pater, is exempt from paying. And so the Gemara now asks, V'isa, now if it is really true that in a situation of ta bidvar Mishnah, we say that the case is tried again, so Leimalei, so what he should have said to him was, Toa bidvar Mishnata, you made a mistake in a Mishnah. V'toa bidvar Mishnah choser, in a situation of Toa bidvar Mishnah, the case is retried, and that's why you don't have to pay, because really you have to retry the case. And the Gemara says, Chada v'yod kaman, he was actually saying one reason, but there was another reason as well. Chada de Toa bidvar Mishnata. Number one, it was a mistake in a dvar Mishnah. V'toa bidvar Mishnah choser, and in the case of Toa bidvar Mishnah, we retry the case. V'yod, and further, inami b'shikol hadas toyis, even if it was a mistake of shikol hadas, mumcha l'ravim ato, you're considered an expert for the public. V'chol ha'mumcha l'ravim pater milashalim, and anyone who's an expert for the public is exempt from paying. And Rashi explains, again, Todos Harofe said, Ein para v'chazer v'chulo, there was no cows or pigs that were coming out of Alexandria of Egypt unless they cut out the womb. Lefisha Tovo saying, Rashi explains, because they were good quality. Vein rotzen shiyu mitzuyas b'mekomos acheres, the people of Alexandria, they didn't want such good quality animals to be found in other places. V'kachazina demiskaimos, and the point is we see that such animals are able to survive, they're not considered a treifa. And then Holcha chamorcha tarfon, Rabbi Tarfon said that you've lost your donkey. Kolomar, what he means to say is, Tzarech ani limchor es chamori, I'm going to have to sell my donkey, in order to get the money, in order to pay back that cow to the original owners. And Rashi continues, Tov b'dvar Mishnah, I tell you just made a mistake in a Mishnah, Stam Mishni, because that's a Stam Mishnah, Be'elu Treifus, it's an Elu Treifus, it's an unattributed Mishnah, Nitzel Ha'im Shalok Kashera, that if the womb is taken out, the animal is kosher. And Rashi continues, V'tov b'dvar Mishnah Choser, if you make a mistake in a Mishnah, then we retry the case. Well, the Kamon Parach Hachamai Chazarika, now the Gemara later will ask, how can we retry the case in this situation? Harei Hachila L'Klavim, the animal was already fed to the dogs, there's nothing to retry. And the Gemara continues, as Rashi just mentioned, Amar of Nachman bar Yitzchak l'Rava, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says to Rava, Maika Mosiv Rav Hamnuna l'Rav Sheshes mi para. What question exactly is Rav Hamnuna asking Rav Sheshes from this Mishnah with the cow? Para harei ha'chila l'klavim. This cow, he already fed it to the dogs. It's not even around that we can retry the case. And the Gemara says, this is what he's saying to him. If you're going to say that a mistake in a Mishnah, so then we don't retry the case, Alma Kamdina, so we see that the ruling was in effect. That's why Rabbi Tarfon is afraid that he's going to have to pay. And so then he's being told, you're an expert for the court, and therefore you're exempt from paying. But if you're going to say that if someone makes a mistake in a Mishnah that we retry the case, so then what he should have said to him was, since if this cow was still around, your ruling was not a ruling, then you haven't really done anything, so hashtanami lo klumavadet. So too now, even though the cow is not around, what you did is considered nothing, and that's why you don't have to pay. That is the explanation of the exchange. And the Gemara continues with another answer to the original question at the top of the Yom. Rav Chisda says, Kanshan notal v'nasan biyad. In one case, we're talking where the judge actively gave the money to the wrong party, and Kanshan lo notal v'nasan biyad. In the other case, we're talking where he just issued a ruling but didn't actively give the money over. And Rashi explains, Rav Chisda mahadir le'ela shenuye masnisa donis adin. Rav Chisda is trying to answer the question that we had earlier, that again the Mishnah Bechoros says that the ruling stands, but our Mishnah says that we retry the case. And the answer is nasav and nasan biyad. If the judge actively gave over the money, so then masha asa asi, then the ruling stands. What is done. But lo nasav and nasan biyad. But if he didn't actively give over the money, elatziva lebaldin, he just issued the instruction to the litigant. Vu osa meyatzmo, and the litigant did it on his own. So then machzir hamamun mizeh shekiblo lezeh shenasno. So then already you return the money from the party that accepted it to the party that gave it. But the Gemara continues, B'shlam achayev es hazaka. In that Mishnah in Bechoros, I understand in a situation where the judge said that the person who's innocent is guilty, kagon shenatal v'nasan biyad. You can say that the judge actively took the money from one party and gave it to the other party. That would make sense. Elo zika es achayev, but the Mishnah in Bechoros had also said a case where zika es achayev, he said that the person who's guilty is innocent and does not have to pay. So hechi mashkachas la, how do you have a situation where the judge took any money? There was no money to take. He was essentially saying somebody that should have been paying did not have to pay. So what exactly did the judge take with his hands? And the Gemara says, the Gemara says that what the Mishnah means is the judge simply said, you are exempt. But the Gemara says, how does that make sense? But if that's the case, he didn't actually take anything in his hands. And the Gemara says, no, Kevan damar patarato, since he said you're exempt, kimo shenatal v'nasan biyad dami. That's the same thing as taking it in his hands. But the Gemara continues, if that's the case, elamas nisim, but then going back to our Mishnah, to katani dine maminis machzir bein lezuchus bein lechov, our Mishnah says that when it comes to monetary cases, we retry the case whether for innocence or whether for guilt. So bishlam lezuchus, now I understand we're going to retry it for innocence. Mashkachas lo, you can have the situation. Originally he said you have to pay. V'lo natal v'lo nasan biyad, but he didn't actually, the judge didn't take anything in his hands, and so therefore we're retrying it lezuchus. As we said, if he doesn't actually take anything in his hands and give it from one party to the other, then we retry the case. So you can understand that part of the Mishnah. Ela lechova, but when the Mishnah says that we're going to retry a case for guilt, so in that situation what happened is that the judge said innocent, pater ata, and now we're retrying the case to say guilty. But if he said pater ata, that's the same as natal v'nasan biyad. Hechi mashkachas la, what exactly would be the case of retrying a case lechova? Diyomer le pater ata, that apparently the judge originally said that you were exempt. V'amar, but didn't you just say kevan damer le pater ata? Once the judge says you're pater, kimosha natal v'nasan biyad dami. That's the same thing as the judge actively taking it in his hands, and so therefore this answer of the distinction between our Mishnah and the Mishnah in Bechoros, the answer does not work. And the Gemara continues, Chada Katani. The Gemara says, according to this answer, you're going to have to say that in our Mishnah, it's actually all one statement. Meaning to say, in our Mishnah, when it says in the Mishnah, Dine Mamanis Machzirin Bein Lezachus Bein Lechova, it doesn't actually mean two separate cases of Lezachus and Lechova. What it actually means is, Dine Mamanis Machzirin Lezachus Shehi Chova. When it comes to Dine Mamanis, when it comes to monetary cases, we will retry the case for innocence, Shehi Chova, that could be a Chova for the other party. And Rashi explains, Umeshani Chada Katani, the Gemara answers that our Mishnah is really all one case. The Liolam Lechova Ein Machzir, and really, to go back and retry the case to make the person guilty, we wouldn't do that. Because once he said he's innocent, he said padrata, that's like natal v'nasan biyad. Elameshalim ibesa, rather in that situation, the judge would actually have to pay. Since he was natal v'nasan biyad, he has to pay for the damage that he caused, he has to compensate, and we do not retry the case. Umasnisan chada katani, in our Mishnah, when it says bein lezachus bein lechov, it's really all one case. It means machzir hadavar lezachuso shelzeh. It means we'll retry the case to make this person innocent, im chayvu if they originally made him obligated, and again, the judge didn't actively take the money from one party and give it to the other. So then, so then we will retry the case for that person's benefit, which will be the obligation, which will be the liability of the other party, because he's going to have to return that which he collected. But the Gemara continues, if that's the case, the chavasa gabe nefashas, then in the Mishnah, you're also going to have to learn the Mishnah the same way when it was talking about capital cases. It said machzir and lozachos. It says we retry the case to make the person innocent. And Rashi explains the chavasa gabe nefashas al karcha chachi boy lefurusha. You're going to have to explain din nefashas in the same way. Velos is chilik ben din mamanis l'din nefashas, because the whole point is the Mishnah is trying to make a distinction between monetary cases and capital cases. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Lamed Gimel Amid Beis.